The morning sun streamed through the blinds of Marcus Johnson's modest apartment as he prepared for another day of teaching at Westside Community College. At 42 years old, Marcus had built a respectable life for himself. His students admired his patient teaching style in the computer science department, and his neighbors knew him as the quiet, helpful man who always offered to carry groceries for the elderly residents in the building. That ordinary Tuesday in April began like any other. Marcus graded papers while sipping his coffee, dressed in his usual button-down shirt and tie, and headed out to his car. He had no idea that by evening, his life would be shattered beyond recognition. "Marcus Johnson," the taller officer asked, though it wasn't really a question. "We need you to come with us." Confused but cooperative, Marcus asked a colleague to watch his class. "There must be some mistake," he said calmly as they led him through the hallway. Students and faculty stared as the respected instructor was escorted out of the building. In the parking lot, things escalated quickly. Without explanation, the officers pushed Marcus against their patrol car and handcuffed him. His requests for information were met with cold silence. Only when he was seated in the back of the police car did the older officer say, "You're being arrested in connection with the Jenkins robbery. You have the right to remain silent." Marcus's mind raced. The Jenkins robbery? He had never heard of it. The local news had mentioned a home invasion at a wealthy estate on the other side of town last week, but he had no connection to that neighborhood or family. At the police station, Marcus was fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in a holding cell. Hours passed before a detective named Brennan finally appeared for questioning. The man's demeanor was immediately hostile. "We know you did it, Johnson. We have a witness that places you at the scene," Detective Brennan said, slapping a folder onto the metal table between them. "That's impossible," Marcus replied. "I was teaching a night class when this robbery happened. 20 students and another faculty member can confirm that." The detective's expression didn't change. "Funny how you know exactly when the robbery took place, when I haven't told you that information." "It was on the news," Marcus explained, feeling the first real tremors of fear. Something was very wrong here. The questioning continued for hours. Marcus repeatedly asked for a lawyer, was told he would get one when the time comes. Outside the interrogation room, he caught glimpses of a man in an expensive suit watching through the one-way glass. Victor Haynes, the county prosecutor, known for his tough-on-crime stance and impressive conviction record. What Marcus didn't know was that Haynes had political ambitions beyond his current position, and building a case against a black suspect in a high-profile robbery of a prominent white family's home would play well with certain voters. By morning, exhausted and terrified, Marcus was formally charged with armed robbery, breaking and entering, and assault. His bail was set at $500,000, an impossible sum for a community college instructor. Marcus's sister Tamika rushed to the courthouse when she heard the news. "This is insane," she shouted as officers led Marcus away after his arraignment. "My brother is innocent. He's never even had a parking ticket." From his cell at the county jail, Marcus called the only lawyer he could afford, a public defender named Alan Webb who seemed overwhelmed and distracted during their brief meeting. "Look, the evidence they claim to have is pretty compelling," Webb said, flipping through the case file. "They have a witness who identified you, and they found items in your apartment that matched the description of stolen goods." "That's impossible," Marcus insisted. "I'd never been to the Jenkins home. Someone must have planted those items. And any witness who claims they saw me is either lying or mistaken." Webb looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Johnson, the witness is a security guard with no criminal record. And the prosecutor's office is pushing this case hard. Victor Haynes himself is taking the lead." Outside the jail, Tamika started making calls to everyone she knew. She contacted Marcus's colleagues, students, and neighbors. She reached out to local community activists and even tried to interest journalists in her brother's case. Most disturbingly, she discovered that 3 other black men had been arrested for similar crimes in the last year, all prosecuted by Haynes, all with questionable evidence. All 3 were now serving long prison sentences. As Marcus spent his first night in jail, the realization hit him hard. He wasn't just fighting for his innocence. He was up against a system that seemed designed to destroy him, regardless of the truth. 2 weeks passed with Marcus Johnson still behind bars. The county jail was overcrowded, noisy, and smelled of bleach that couldn't quite mask other, less pleasant odors. He shared a cell with 3 other men, all waiting for their day in court, all telling him the same thing. With Victor Haynes as prosecutor, he should take any deal offered. Marcus refused to believe this. He had faith in the system, despite everything. He had never been in trouble before, had witnesses for his alibi, and knew the truth would come out. This confidence began to waver, however, when his public defender Alan Webb visited him with news about the charges. "They've added another charge," Webb said, not meeting Marcus's eyes. "They're now saying you were involved in 2 other robberies in the area." Marcus stood up from the small metal stool. "What? That's ridiculous. I haven't robbed anyone, ever. What evidence do they have?" Webb shuffled through his papers. They claimed the method was similar, and they found a watch from one of the robberies in your apartment. "That watch was a gift from my father," Marcus said, his voice rising. "I have photos of me wearing it years ago. This is insane." Webb lowered his voice. "The prosecutor's office is offering a deal. Plead guilty to 1 count of robbery, and they'll drop the other charges. You'd be looking at 5 years instead of potentially 20. Marcus stared at his lawyer in disbelief. "You want me to plead guilty to something I didn't do?" "I'm just presenting the offer," Webb said defensively. "Look, the witness is very convincing. He's a security guard who says he saw you clearly near the Jenkins property that night, and they have those items from your apartment. Juries believe physical evidence." "Those items were planted," Marcus insisted. "And this security guard is either lying or mistaken. Did you check my alibi? I was teaching a night class." Webb sighed. "I did, but there's a 30-minute window between when your class ended and when you used your key card to enter your apartment building. The prosecutor says that's enough time for you to have committed the robbery." "That's because I stopped for gas." Marcus felt his heart pounding. "Check the gas station security cameras. They'll prove I was there." Webb made a note but didn't look hopeful. "I'll try, but most of those places only keep footage for a week or so." As Webb left, Marcus sat on his bunk, head in his hands. His life was unraveling, and he felt powerless to stop it. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus's sister Tamika was on a mission. She'd taken leave from her nursing job to fight for her brother. Today, she sat in the back of the courtroom, watching Victor Haynes prosecute another case. She wanted to understand what they were up against. Haynes was impressive in court, tall, well-dressed, with a commanding voice that held the jury's attention. He spoke with absolute certainty about the defendant's guilt, painting a vivid picture of the crime. The defense attorney seemed small and uncertain by comparison. After court, Tamika approached a woman she'd seen taking notes during the trial. "Are you a reporter?" Tamika asked. The woman looked up. "Aisha Washington, Capital City Tribune. Can I help you? My brother is Marcus Johnson. He's being framed for robberies he didn't commit, and Victor Haynes is pushing the case despite clear evidence of my brother's innocence." Aisha's expression remained neutral, but she took out a business card. "I get a lot of family members saying their loved ones are innocent. What makes your brother's case different?" "He has an alibi. He's a college instructor with no record. And the evidence they claimed to have found in his apartment appeared mysteriously after police searched it the first time and found nothing." Aisha raised her eyebrows. "That's interesting. Do you have documentation of this?" Tamika handed her a folder. "This is everything we have so far. Please, just look at it. Something very wrong is happening here." Back at the jail, Marcus received another visitor, Professor Helen Chen from the college, his department chair. "The faculty is behind you," she assured him. "We've started a defense fund, and I brought the attendance records and security footage from the college showing you were teaching when the Jenkins robbery occurred." For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. But that evening, he overheard 2 guards talking outside his cell. "Johnson's case. Yeah, Haynes is handling it personally. Must be important to someone. I heard they're rushing it to trial." "Poor guy," the other guard replied. "When Haynes puts his name on a case, it's already over." As Marcus lay on his bunk that night, he realized the truth of what he was facing. This wasn't just about proving his innocence. He was up against a system where power mattered more than truth, and Victor Haynes had all the power. 1 month after his arrest, Marcus Johnson sat in the county courthouse for his preliminary hearing. The courtroom was mostly empty, just a few curious onlookers, his sister Tamika and Professor Chen from the college. His public defender, Alan Webb, shuffled papers nervously beside him. Across the aisle, Victor Haynes sat with perfect posture, his expensive suit without a wrinkle. Two assistant prosecutors flanked him, passing him notes and whispering in his ear. They looked like a well-oiled machine compared to Marcus's single, overworked defender. Judge Howard Brenner entered, and everyone rose. Marcus had researched the judge online through the jail's limited computer access. Brenner had been appointed 15 years ago and had a reputation for running a strict courtroom and imposing harsh sentences, especially for property crimes. Case number 2023 CR 4872, State versus Marcus Johnson, the clerk announced. As the hearing began, Marcus watched with growing horror as the prosecution's case unfolded. The security guard, a man named Timothy Ross, testified that he had seen a black man matching Marcus's description near the Jenkins estate on the night of the robbery. When asked if that man was in the courtroom, Ross pointed directly at Marcus without hesitation. "I'm certain it was him," Ross stated. "I got a good look at his face when my flashlight hit him." Webb's cross-examination was brief and ineffective. He asked only basic questions about lighting conditions and how far away Ross had been when he supposedly saw Marcus. Next came Detective Brennan, who testified about the items found in Marcus's apartment: a small jade figurine and a silver letter opener that matched the description of items stolen from the Jenkins home. "And where exactly were these items found?" Haynes asked. "In a shoebox in the back of the defendant's closet," Brennan answered. When Webb stood to cross-examine, he did raise the point that the initial search of Marcus's apartment had not turned up these items. "Isn't it true that these objects were only discovered in a second search, conducted when the defendant was already in custody?" Detective Brennan's answer came smoothly, as if rehearsed. "We conducted a more thorough search based on new information from our investigation. The items were concealed well, which is why they weren't found initially." Webb looked like he wanted to push further but instead sat down. Marcus leaned over to whisper, "What about my alibi? The college footage?" "We'll present that in the actual trial," Webb whispered back. "This is just the preliminary hearing to determine if there's enough evidence to proceed to trial." Marcus watched as Judge Brenner nodded along with the prosecution's arguments, occasionally asking questions that seemed to strengthen their case. When the prosecution finished, the judge turned to the defense. "Mr. Webb, do you have any witnesses for today's hearing?" Webb stood. "No, Your Honor. We reserve our evidence for trial." "Very well," Judge Brenner said. "Based on the evidence presented, I find probable cause to believe that the defendant committed the crimes charged. The case will proceed to trial. Let's discuss scheduling." As the lawyers approached the bench to discuss dates, Marcus turned to look at the sparse audience. His eyes met those of a woman he didn't recognize, who was taking detailed notes. Tamika leaned forward and whispered to him, "That's Aisha Washington from the Capital City Tribune. She's interested in your case." For the first time, Marcus felt a spark of hope. Someone was paying attention beyond his small circle of supporters. After the hearing, as Marcus was being led back to the holding cell, he passed by Victor Haynes in the hallway. The prosecutor was speaking to someone on his phone. "Yes, sir, the Johnson case is proceeding as planned," Haynes was saying. "The judge found probable cause, as expected. We should have a trial date within 60 days. It will be wrapped up well before your campaign announcement." Marcus couldn't hear who was on the other end of that call, but the conversation sent a chill through him. His case was connected to someone's political ambitions. Back in his jail cell that evening, Marcus received a visitor. Aisha Washington had arranged an interview. "Mr. Johnson, I've been looking into your case," she said, sitting across from him in the visitation room. "And I found some concerning patterns in cases prosecuted by Victor Haynes." "What kind of patterns?" Marcus asked. "Black defendants receiving much harsher charges and sentences than white defendants in similar cases. Evidence appearing mysteriously after initial searches. Witnesses changing their stories after meetings with the prosecutor's office." She looked at him intently. "Your sister gave me your alibi information. I checked the college security footage myself. You were teaching at the exact time of the Jenkins robbery." The trial of Marcus Johnson began on a rainy Monday in June, 3 months after his arrest. The county courthouse was busier now, with a small crowd gathered outside. Some held signs supporting Marcus, organized by his colleagues from the college. Others were there out of curiosity, drawn by Aisha Washington's recent articles questioning the prosecution's tactics in the case. Inside the courtroom, Marcus sat beside Alan Webb, watching as potential jurors filed in. The jury selection process quickly revealed troubling patterns. Victor Haynes used his peremptory challenges to dismiss every black person from the jury pool. When Webb objected, Haynes provided seemingly neutral reasons for each dismissal. One juror had a relative who had been incarcerated, another worked in education like Marcus, a third lived in the same neighborhood as Marcus. Judge Brenner accepted each explanation without question. By day's end, the jury consisted of 10 white members and 2 Hispanic individuals. Not a single black person remained. "This is not going to be a fair trial," Marcus whispered to Webb. "We'll appeal if we need to," Webb replied, but his tone lacked conviction. In his opening statement, Haynes painted Marcus as a man living a double life, respected teacher by day, calculating thief by night. He spoke with such certainty that several jurors were nodding along within minutes. "The evidence will show," Haynes declared, "that the defendant used his position at the college as cover for a string of sophisticated burglaries targeting our community's most prominent citizens." Webb's opening statement was brief and defensive. He promised to show that Marcus had an alibi, that the evidence was circumstantial, and that his client was an upstanding citizen with no criminal record. The prosecution's case unfolded over 3 days. Timothy Ross, the security guard, testified again about seeing Marcus near the Jenkins property. Under Webb's cross-examination, he admitted he had only glimpsed the person for a few seconds from about 50 feet away, but remained absolutely certain it was Marcus. When Webb tried to ask about Ross's brother working in the prosecutor's office, Haynes objected immediately. "Irrelevant, Your Honor," he said. "The witness's family connections have no bearing on what he saw that night." Sustained. Judge Brenner ruled without hesitation. "Mr. Webb, stick to relevant matters." Next came the physical evidence. The jade figurine and silver letter opener were displayed for the jury. Detective Brennan testified again about finding them in Marcus's apartment. Webb tried to highlight the suspicious timing of their discovery, but his questions were constantly interrupted by objections from Haynes, most of which the judge sustained. On the 4th day, it was the defense's turn. Webb called Professor Chen, who testified about Marcus teaching his evening class at the time of the Jenkins robbery. She brought attendance records and the security footage showing Marcus entering and leaving the campus building. Haynes's cross-examination was brutal. "Is it not possible, Professor Chen, that the defendant left campus between classes? This footage only shows him at specific times, correct?" "Well, yes, but..." "And these attendance records only confirm he was there at the beginning and end of class, correct? Not continuously throughout." "That's technically true, but..." "Thank you, Professor. No further questions." Webb also called the gas station attendant who had seen Marcus the night of the robbery, but the man's memory was vague after months had passed. The security footage from the gas station had been erased long ago, as it was only kept for 2 weeks. As the trial progressed, Marcus noticed Aisha Washington in the courtroom every day, taking detailed notes. She wasn't alone anymore. Other reporters had joined her, and the local TV news had started covering the case. On the 5th day, something unexpected happened. During the lunch break, Webb was approached by a nervous young man who identified himself as an intern at the prosecutor's office. "I have information about your client's case," the intern whispered. "Meet me at the coffee shop across the street after court today." Webb told Marcus about this strange encounter as they waited for the afternoon session to begin. "Do you think it's a trap?" Marcus asked. "I don't know," Webb admitted, "but I'm going to find out." The afternoon dragged on with technical testimony from forensic experts. After court adjourned, Webb left for the coffee shop while Marcus was taken back to jail. That evening, Webb visited Marcus with a stunned expression. "The intern gave me this," he said, showing Marcus a folder. "It's internal documents from the prosecutor's office. There's a memo here discussing your case as a perfect opportunity to support the law and order campaign." The courtroom fell silent after Judge Brenner's ruling to exclude the leaked documents. Marcus sat frozen, watching as his last hope seemed to vanish. Webb stood up, his face flushed with anger. "Your Honor, these documents prove prosecutorial misconduct. They show evidence was planted in my client's apartment. This is a clear violation of due process. Judge Brenner's gavel came down hard. Mr. Webb, I've made my ruling. These documents were obtained illegally and will not be considered by this court. He leaned forward. One more outburst like that, and I'll hold you in contempt. From her seat in the gallery, Aisha Washington watched this exchange with intense interest. During the lunch break, she approached Tamika in the courthouse hallway. I need to speak with you, Aisha said quietly. Not here. Meet me at the diner 2 blocks north in 20 minutes. Tamika nodded, her eyes red from crying. The case against her brother was moving forward, despite clear evidence of his innocence. The system felt like a machine that couldn't be stopped. At the diner, Aisha was already seated in a back booth when Tamika arrived. A manila envelope sat on the table between them. What's going on? Tamika asked, sliding into the booth. The judge may have blocked those documents from the trial, but he can't stop me from investigating them, Aisha said, her voice low. My source at the prosecutor's office gave me copies before Webb got his. I've been digging deeper, and what I found goes far beyond your brother's case. She opened the envelope and spread several papers on the table. Look at these statistics. In the past 3 years, Victor Haynes has prosecuted 47 cases involving black defendants charged with property crimes. 42 resulted in convictions with sentences averaging 12 years. She pointed to another sheet. For white defendants with similar charges and similar evidence, the conviction rate is lower, and the average sentence is 4 years. Tamika stared at the numbers. That's more than a coincidence. It's systematic, Aisha confirmed. And there's more. Remember Timothy Ross, the security guard who identified your brother? I looked into his background. Before becoming a security guard 2 years ago, he worked as a police officer in another county. He was forced to resign after allegations of racial profiling and evidence tampering. How is he allowed to testify as a credible witness? Tamika asked, her voice rising. Because Haynes deliberately concealed this information from the defense, Aisha explained. And Judge Brenner has been helping him. They're old friends from law school, and Brenner's re-election campaign last year received a substantial donation from a political action committee connected to Haynes's office. Tamika put her head in her hands. So they're all working together against my brother. Not just your brother, Aisha said gently. This is a pattern affecting dozens of cases, but your brother's case could be the one that exposes it all. How? The judge won't allow the evidence. Aisha's eyes gleamed with determination. The court can ignore these documents, but the public can't. I'm publishing everything tomorrow. The statistics, Ross's background, the connection between Haynes and Brenner, and the leaked documents showing how evidence was planted in your brother's apartment. Won't you get in trouble? Tamika asked. Possibly, but I became a journalist to expose the truth, not to play it safe. Aisha gathered the papers back into the envelope. There's one more thing. The intern who leaked these documents. He's agreed to go on record. His name is Jason Miller, and he's been documenting Haynes's misconduct for months. Back in the courtroom that afternoon, closing arguments began. Haynes spoke with theatrical confidence, weaving the evidence into a compelling narrative of guilt. Webb did his best to highlight the holes in the prosecution's case, but without the leaked documents, his arguments seemed hollow. As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, Marcus felt a heavy sense of doom. Even if Aisha published her story tomorrow, it might be too late to affect the verdict. That evening, as Marcus sat alone in his cell, a guard approached. Johnson, you have a visitor. To his surprise, it wasn't Webb or Tamika, but Jason Miller, the intern from the prosecutor's office. He looked nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. I don't have much time, Jason said. I wanted you to know that I'm going public with everything tomorrow. I've been keeping notes and recordings for months. Haynes isn't just corrupt. He's been working with certain judges and police officers to target black defendants and secure convictions for political gain. Why are you doing this? Marcus asked. You're risking your career. The morning Marcus Johnson's jury was set to deliver their verdict, the Capital City Tribune hit newsstands with Aisha Washington's explosive front-page story. Bold headlines announced. Justice for SALE. How Prosecutor Victor Haynes built his career on racist prosecutions and planted evidence. The article detailed everything. The statistical evidence of racial bias, the planted evidence in Marcus's apartment, and Jason Miller's first-hand account of corruption in the prosecutor's office. By 8 a.m., the courthouse steps were crowded with protesters, reporters, and curious citizens. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky. Inside the courthouse, security was doubled as officials prepared for what would surely be a volatile day. Victor Haynes arrived early, pushing through the crowd with his head down. Reporters shouted questions at him. "Mr. Haynes, did you plant evidence in Marcus Johnson's apartment? Is it true you've been targeting black defendants to advance your political career? Do you have any response to Jason Miller's allegations?" Haynes ignored them all, his usually confident face now tight with anger. Inside, he immediately demanded an emergency meeting with Judge Brenner. In the judge's chambers, Haynes paced back and forth. "This is slander, pure and simple. We need to issue a gag order immediately and confiscate all copies of today's Tribune." Judge Brenner looked troubled. "Victor, that's not possible. The story is already out there. And frankly, these allegations are serious. There are statistics, documents, recordings. They were obtained illegally." Haynes shouted. "You already ruled on that." "In court, yes, but the court of public opinion operates under different rules." Judge Brenner removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "The State Bar Association has already called me. They're opening an investigation. The Justice Department might get involved too." "So you're abandoning me?" Haynes asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm protecting myself," Brenner replied. "And you should too. This jury is about to render a verdict in a case that the whole city now believes was corrupted from the start. Think carefully about your next move." Meanwhile, in the holding cell, Marcus sat with Alan Webb, discussing the morning's developments. "This changes everything," Webb said, showing Marcus a copy of the Tribune. "The jury hasn't been sequestered. They've almost certainly seen this or heard about it." "So what happens now?" Marcus asked. "Legally, the judge should declare a mistrial," Webb explained. "But given Brenner's history with Haynes, he might try to push through to a verdict anyway. I filed an emergency motion for dismissal based on this new public evidence." A knock on the door interrupted them. A court officer entered. "The judge wants everyone in the courtroom in 15 minutes. He's made a decision about how to proceed." The courtroom was packed when Marcus entered. He saw Tamika in the front row, sitting beside Professor Chen and several of his colleagues. Behind them sat Aisha Washington, her face showing no emotion as she took notes. Jason Miller was there too, surrounded by what looked like security guards. Private protection, Marcus realized, not court officers. Judge Brenner entered, his face grave. "Before we bring in the jury, I need to address recent developments. An article published today makes serious allegations about the conduct of the prosecution in this case. While I previously ruled that certain documents were inadmissible because they were obtained illegally, I cannot ignore the broader evidence that has now come to light." Haynes jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The jury should be making their decision based solely on the evidence presented in court, not newspaper articles." "Sit down, Mr. Haynes," Judge Brenner said sharply. "Given the extraordinary circumstances, I am exercising my authority to dismiss this case with prejudice." A gasp went through the courtroom, followed by cheers from Marcus's supporters. Marcus himself sat frozen, unable to believe what he was hearing. Furthermore, Judge Brenner continued, raising his voice over the noise, "I am referring this matter to the State Bar Association for investigation into possible ethical violations and criminal conduct by the prosecutor's office. Mr. Johnson," he said, looking directly at Marcus, "you are free to go. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down with finality. Marcus turned to Webb, who was grinning broadly. "It's over," Webb said. "You're free." But as Marcus stood to embrace his sister, who was rushing toward him with tears streaming down her face, Victor Haynes approached. "This isn't over, Johnson," he hissed. "You think you've won, but you just made an enemy of the most powerful man in this city." 1 week after Marcus Johnson's case was dismissed, the small apartment he once called home felt strange to him. Everything was exactly as he had left it 4 months ago, yet nothing felt the same. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower. The silence, after months of constant jail noise, was almost painful. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of newspapers. Every major outlet had covered his story. The Capital City Tribune had dedicated an entire special edition to the scandal, with Aisha Washington's byline on most articles. The headline of today's paper read, "12 more cases under REVIEW as Haney's investigation expands." The doorbell rang. Marcus tensed, a reflex from his months in custody. He still jumped at sudden noises, still woke up confused about where he was. "It's just me," Tamika called through the door. She had started announcing herself after noticing how he flinched whenever someone arrived unexpectedly. She wasn't alone. Aisha Washington and Jason Miller stood with her, both carrying folders. "We have news," Aisha said as they settled in the living room. The State Bar Association has suspended Haynes's license pending their investigation. The FBI has seized all files from his office and home, and the mayor has announced a special commission to review every case Haynes prosecuted in the last 5 years. Marcus nodded, trying to feel something: satisfaction, relief, vindication. Instead, he just felt tired. What about the others? The people still in prison? Jason opened his folder. "That's why we're here. I've identified 23 cases with patterns similar to yours: lack defendants, questionable evidence, heavy sentences. The public defender's office is filing motions for review in all of them. And they want you to help," Tamika added, watching her brother carefully. "Me? How?" Marcus asked. "Your story has put a human face on a statistical problem," Aisha explained. "People who never cared about prosecutorial misconduct are suddenly paying attention because of what happened to you. The advocacy groups organizing these cases want you to speak at a rally next week." Marcus ran his hand over his face. "I don't know. I'm not a public speaker. I'm just trying to put my life back together." "I understand," Jason said quietly, "but your voice matters. When I decided to leak those documents, it was after seeing your case file. I knew you were innocent, and I couldn't be part of a system that would destroy an innocent man's life for political gain." Marcus looked at the young man who had risked his career to tell the truth. "Have you found a new job yet?" Jason smiled slightly. "The Justice Department's Civil Rights Division has shown interest. Apparently, whistleblowers make good investigators." Their conversation was interrupted by another ring at the door. This time it was Alan Webb, Marcus's former public defender, looking more energetic than Marcus had ever seen him. "I just came from a meeting with the State Attorney General," Webb announced, joining them in the living room. "They're creating a special unit to investigate wrongful convictions, and they'd asked me to join it." "That's great," Marcus said, genuinely happy for the lawyer who had stuck by him despite overwhelming odds. "There's more," Webb continued. "The college board voted unanimously yesterday. They want you back, Marcus. Full reinstatement, with back pay for the months you were gone. Professor Chen personally guaranteed that your position would remain open for you." For the first time since his release, Marcus felt something crack in his carefully maintained composure. His eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if I can go back to my old life just like that. Everything has changed." "Of course it has," Tamika said gently, taking his hand. "You've changed, but that doesn't mean you can't rebuild." "And you won't be doing it alone," Webb added. "The same community that supported you during the trial is still there, waiting to welcome you back." Aisha, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "There's something else you should know. My editor has been getting calls from publishers. They want your story, Marcus, a book about your experience and the broader issues it reveals about our justice system." Marcus looked surprised. "I'm not a writer." "You don't have to be," Aisha explained. "They're talking about a collaboration. Your experience, my investigative skills. We could work together to tell the story the way it deserves to be told." For the first time in months, Marcus felt a spark of purpose. His ordeal had nearly destroyed him, but it had also exposed injustices that had been hidden for years. Perhaps there was meaning to be found in that. 6 months after his release, Marcus Johnson stood before a crowd of 500 people gathered on the courthouse steps. The same building that had nearly stolen his future now served as the backdrop for his most important speech yet. Behind him stood 12 men and women, all recently freed after reviews of their cases revealed similar patterns of prosecutorial misconduct under Victor Haynes. "When I was arrested last year," Marcus began, his voice stronger and more confident than he ever thought possible, "I believed in our justice system. I thought the truth would be enough to set me free." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces watching him intently. I was wrong. The truth wasn't enough. It took courage. The courage of a young intern who risked everything to expose corruption, the determination of a journalist who refused to look away, and the love of a sister who never stopped fighting for me. Among the crowd, Marcus could see familiar faces. Tamika stood in the front row, beaming with pride. Beside her was Professor Chen and a group of his former students, many holding signs that read, "We LCO&E back Professor Johnson." Aisha Washington stood to the side, recording the speech for the final chapter of their book, which had already received offers from 3 major publishers. Today isn't just about celebrating our freedom, Marcus continued, gesturing to the men and women behind him. It's about acknowledging how much work still remains. For every one of us standing here, there are dozens still waiting for justice. In the 6 months since the scandal broke, the city's criminal justice system had undergone a remarkable transformation. Judge Brenner had resigned rather than face an ethics investigation. The new district attorney had created a conviction integrity unit, headed by Alan Webb, which had already reviewed over 100 cases prosecuted by Haynes. 37 convictions had been overturned, with more reviews ongoing. As for Victor Haynes, Marcus said, his voice tightening slightly at the name, his trial begins next month. He faces 27 counts of evidence tampering, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice. The man who built his career putting innocent people behind bars will now have to answer for his crimes in the very courtroom where he once seemed invincible. The crowd erupted in applause. Haynes's downfall had been swift and complete. After the FBI investigation revealed the full extent of his misconduct, including recorded conversations discussing how to plant evidence and pressure witnesses, even his most loyal supporters had abandoned him. His political ambitions were shattered, his reputation destroyed. But our story isn't about vengeance, Marcus continued when the noise subsided. It's about reform. Today, I'm proud to announce the creation of the Justice Reform Alliance, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preventing what happened to us from happening to others. This was the project that had consumed Marcus for the past 3 months. Using the settlement money from his wrongful prosecution lawsuit against the county, plus donations from community members and local businesses, he had established an organization to provide legal support, public education, and advocacy for criminal justice reform. The alliance will work on 3 fronts, Marcus explained. First, direct support for those fighting wrongful convictions. Second, education for communities about their legal rights. And third, lobbying for legislative changes to prevent prosecutorial misconduct. Jason Miller, now officially employed by the Justice Department but volunteering his free time with the Alliance, stood up to join Marcus at the microphone. Our first initiative launches today, Jason announced. A tip line and website where whistleblowers within the system can safely report misconduct without fear of retaliation. If I had had access to something like this a year ago, maybe Marcus and others would have been spared months of unjust imprisonment. As the speech concluded and the crowd dispersed, Marcus found himself surrounded by family, friends, and well-wishers. Among them was Roberto Vasquez, recently released after 5 years of wrongful imprisonment, with his sister Maria. "I start my new job next week," Roberto told Marcus excitedly. "A construction company that works with the Alliance's re-entry program." "That's great," Marcus said, genuinely happy for him. "How does it feel to be rebuilding your life?" "Strange," Roberto admitted. "Some days I wake up and still think I'm in my cell, but it gets better. Having purpose helps." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. His own return to teaching had been challenging. Some students stared at him with curiosity, knowing his story from the news. Some colleagues seemed unsure how to act around him, but in the classroom, explaining computer science concepts, he found moments of normalcy amid the chaos his life had.